Welcome to the Your Love Ministries. Tell me a Bible story with Pam Baggot and me, Brenda Poarch. In our last podcast, we began the beautiful story. So maybe I should have said three beautiful love stories in one. We already talked about the bond of love that Naomi and Ruth had for each other. And when Naomi tried to persuade both of her daughters-in-law to go back to their own people after her husbands and sons had died, Orpha went, but Ruth remained. And then we read in Ruth 1 6 and 7 that beautiful pledge that Ruth made to her mother in law to stay with her and make Naomi's God her God. And I just love that. We talked about it last time. It's often at weddings, but it was originally said from a from a daughter in law to a mother in law. And I just think that's just really beautiful.
It is.
So now we have the love of God and a family. And today we're going to look at the love of a man and a woman. So Naomi decided to go back to her people in Bethlehem. And Pam, I'm stammering all over the place today. I don't know what's wrong with me. But can you remind us as to why these ladies didn't just stay where they were and just support themselves?
Well, women didn't have options. Excuse me, guys. Sorry. Women didn't have any options. There were no jobs or inheritance or no future. She knew her daughters-in-law were young and they'd be able to marry again, but that would have to happen with their families. So Naomi was in a country that was foreign to her, and the only family she had there were gone. So going back to Israel made sense, though it would be a sad homecoming without her husband and sons.
I feel so sorry for her, and I think sometimes in our day and time, we don't fully understand what it would have been like to be a woman living in that day and time. To where you had to rely on the men, and there were certain laws that wouldn't even allow you to own property or any of the things that we just really take for
We
granted.
do. Mhm.
And so Naomi's having a rough time, and I don't blame her. She originally left Bethlehem, and she had two sons, and life was good. They got married, but then when she returned, she's lost her husband and both of her sons. Which,
Mhm.
in that day and time, men were a big deal. I mean, we kind of like them now, but they were a really big deal back then. And but through it all, I'm just so amazed and humbled that she remained faithful to God,
Mhm.
but she is hurting. In fact, she's hurting so much that she actually asked to have her name changed to reflect her circumstances, and that's another cultural thing that we don't think much about. A lot of times we pick out names that they sound pretty together, they rhyme, or maybe they were a cousin's name or a father or grandfather's name.
Yeah.
But in Ruth 120, she said to them, "Do not call me Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty has dealt very bitterly with me." So she's saying that the Almighty has dealt bitterly with her, but she's still remaining faithful. I don't know, Pam, what would you say to that? How do you interpret that?
Well, she's got a lot to feel bad about. She's coming back to where she wants to be, but it's a sad homecoming, and she's got no real hope of it getting a lot better, except that now she'll be around some friends and so forth. So she's got a lot to feel upset about, and like she hasn't been treated fairly. She's a woman of faith. She's been God's person all this time, and now he's let all this sorrow come into her life, and she's feeling kind of mistreated.
Now, I think that is a common emotion for all women, regardless of what decade or century they come from.
Hmm.
If we keep getting hit with negative things, sometimes we feel like the Lord is not protecting us, or maybe He's even picking on us. She
Hmm.
says He dealt bitterly with her. And so she's actually wanting her name to change from Naomi, which meant pleasant, to Mara, which means bitter. So she is really suffering,
Hmm.
and I just think about what a blessing this Moabite woman that's coming with her must be. What a blessing Ruth must be to her that she's not abandoning her, she's staying with her. But these two ladies are still in deep distress, and but God's going to take care of them. So let's see what happens next. Family, you read that part.
Okay, we're going to look at Ruth 2, the first and second verses. Now, Naomi had a relative of her husband's, a worthy man of the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth the Moabitess said to Naomi, "Let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain after him in whose sight I shall find favor." And she said to her, "Go, my daughter." Now, The only option for a poor widow would be gleaning. And gleaning meant gathering the last small bits of a harvest that are left after the major harvesting process is over. Jewish law required all reapers to leave the gleaning for strangers, not to pick it up. The fatherless and widows, anyone that wouldn't have the ability to feed themselves or provide for themselves. So they're allowed to go and gather up all those remnants that are left behind by the reapers. Ruth wanted permission to go find a field where she'd be allowed to glean.
So, if she had husbands or if she had a son, they would probably do that physical work, wouldn't they? And then
Yeah,
they would just bring the wheat home where she would cook it. But
mhm,
she doesn't have anyone to do that other side of the job,
right.
which is the gleaning. Um, even in I guess my husband and I have kind of a traditional relationship. I say that he makes the money and I spend it, and I break things and he fixes them. So
Yeah,
that works for
makes
us.
sense to me. Yeah.
Exactly. And so, when you're in a culture like that, to I think about Naomi as an older lady being out in the field gleaning.
That would have been too
Um,
hard.
yeah, it would have been. And so, what a blessing Ruth was to her. So, but now it starts to get interesting because Boaz notices Ruth. And so then he asked his servants in charge of the reapers, who is this lady? Who's this lady I hear in my field? I don't recognize her. And we talked about this a little bit last time, how, probably in that community, everybody knew everybody and everybody knew everybody's business. And so he probably
Yeah.
already knew that Naomi was there. But he was told, and so they told him that she was a Moabite woman and she'd come back with Naomi. And the servants talked how hard Ruth worked. And so Boaz went to speak to this young woman. And this is the conversation in Ruth 2:8-9. Then Boaz said to Ruth, "Now listen, my daughter, do not go to glean in another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young women. Let your eyes be on the field that they are reaping and go after them. Have I not charged the young men not to touch you? And when you are thirsty, go to the vessels and drink what the young men have drawn." Now, I'm reading this and I'm thinking, so there were other women in the field.
Hmm.
So she wasn't, so I guess it wasn't that unusual for a woman to glean, but
No.
probably not someone of Naomi's age. They would probably be more like Ruth's age.
Hmm.
And so I just love the way he talked to her. There was such tenderness and concern, and he's telling her what to do. Get behind my ladies, and I tell the men not to mess with you. And this was huge.
Hmm.
But that's not all that Boaz wants to do for this young Moabite woman. He invites her to eat dinner with the servants and tells the servants to put out some stock from the bundles to leave for her to glean. And when she gets home to Naomi with 30 pounds of grain, and that's a lot, and leftover food for Naomi to eat, Naomi is thrilled, obviously.
Yeah.
And so Ruth would keep gleaning in Boaz's field for the remainder of the harvest. And so that kind of takes care of the short term. Their immediate needs are met.
Hmm.
But if I were Ruth, I'd be thinking, is this the rest of my life, just gleaning from these fields? So, what do you think? Whatever your name is,
Been waiting for this moment since we
Pam.
first became friends. All right.
Pam.
Um, I think Ruth has a different mindset, I think, than most young women. She's been willing to give up her culture, her family, her homeland, everything. So I think that gleaning, she's got a mindset that lets her be humble enough to just, I can do this, that's what I'll do. I don't think she's really feeling mistreated or anything because she made the choices that she's in. She had other options. She could have gone home and found another husband and so forth. So Naomi didn't have many options, but Ruth did, and she's made her choice and she's happy. She's satisfied with it.
That really
But
makes me respect her even
me
more.
too. Yeah, I think maybe that's what Boaz did too. But Naomi's a senior citizen, and she probably isn't expecting much about her future. She's
Mm.
clearly cares about Ruth, and she knows that she has a lifetime that needs a plan. So she's going to focus her energy on taking care of Ruth's future. So let's look at Ruth 3:1. One day Ruth's mother-in-law Naomi said to her, "My daughter, I must find a home for you where you will be well provided for." Some versions say that Naomi was going to seek security for Ruth. Naomi wanted Ruth to have a good future, and that would need to include a husband and a family.
I love the fact that in that verse, she calls her my daughter.
Hmm.
I think that's huge because she was a Moabite woman and Naomi was a Jewish woman. And they are that close. They are like mother and daughter. And I
Hmm.
think that's just really neat. So Ruth knows all about the culture. She knows, I'm sorry, Naomi knows all about the culture. My dyslexia gets me all the time. Naomi knows all about the culture and she knows what you can and can't do according to all the rules and laws. And so she is going to hook her up. So she's going to tell her what to do.
Hmm.
And we find that in Ruth 3:3-5. Therefore, wash yourself and anoint yourself. Put on your best garment and go down to the threshing floor. But do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. Then it shall be when he lies down that you shall notice the place where he lies, and you shall go in, uncover his feet, and lie down, and he will tell you what you should do. So she's going to watch him eat and drink, and then she's going to sneak in and lay down at his feet. I find that very interesting. Is that something that you would normally do?
Well, I've struggled with this instruction from Naomi. It doesn't sound nice, but I've tried to find historical precedent for it, and well, I found the theories, and most of them don't seem to fit right, like square pegs in round holes. So I look at what Naomi knows, and I try to understand what she expects to happen. She knows who Boaz is, probably well enough to know something of his character. And what Ruth tells her about their first encounter shows that he's interested in Ruth and he's a kind gentleman. Ruth has had a few weeks working in his field, and he's seen to it that she was safe and well taken care of. So all of this suggests that he would be a good husband for Naomi. So for Ruth, so I got yours now.
You got my
So
disease.
I do. So Naomi has the plan for Ruth to show him that she's interested. If Naomi was proposing seduction, placing Ruth quietly at the man's feet doesn't seem the most direct method. It would seem to be a humble action. And Boaz has had his stomach filled and is drunk enough to be cheerful, as it says in verse 7. And now he's asleep on the floor. And then we look at Ruth 3 8 to 8 to 11. Now it happened at midnight that the man was startled and turned himself, and there a woman was lying at his feet. And he said, "Who are you?" So she answered, "I am Ruth, your maidservant. Take your maidservant under your wing, for you are a close relative." Then he said, "Blessed are you of the Lord, my daughter, for you have shown more kindness at the end than at the beginning, in that you did not go after young men, whether poor or rich. And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you request, for all the people in my town know that you are a virtuous woman." Now, when he finds her, he doesn't interpret the action as anything sleazy. He sees it as kindness, that she's showing interest in him. And we also pick up here the fact that he's a good bit older than she is. So he likes her and she likes him, and there's just one obstacle to deal with. According to custom, the closest relative can marry the widow of a man, and there is someone who's closer than Boaz to Ruth's family. He must persuade that man to give up his right to marry Ruth.
Wow. I try to picture that scene of him being startled and waking up and finding this woman at his feet and saying, "Who are you?" And it seems like he's pretty humble too, the way he talked to her and everything. But I agree with you. I don't think he perceived it as a sexual type act or anything like that. Probably if she had laid down beside him, that would
Hmm.
have might have been a little more sensual.
Yeah.
But laying down at his feet, our feet are the bottom, and so she is humbling herself. But I love what he says in that last statement that you just read. For all the people of my town know that you are a virtuous woman.
It says
And
so much.
so she had, whatever she had been doing and saying and acting, the whole town knew that she was not uh, unpure. She was a woman of quality.
Hmm.
And so, like you said, now he's got an issue. He's got to see if the other relative is going to take her from him. And that would spoil everything because I just, I never really looked at it as a love story until you pointed it out to me. But, now I'd always focused on Ruth and Naomi, but, now I'm seeing there's some emotion there. There's some, he's touched by her and the way she's acting. Um, but these two have a connection, and the tradition may force her to marry someone else. And Pam, that just doesn't seem fair to me.
Oh no, fair has nothing to do with it. I mean, I've said it before, fair was just really not relevant for women in those days or any generation since then, up to my great grandmother's generation. Marriages are still arranged in some parts of the world today, and the women have little or no choice in the matter. In this case, a chain of command exists, and when we know from other Bible stories that when a man died without an heir, his brother was expected to marry the widow and have a child with her to carry on his brother's name, keep him in the lineage of the first husband. Children born after that were in the second husband's line. Any inheritance from the dead first husband went to the second. So if there was no brother, the next closest male relative would step in. And that's the situation Ruth and Boaz faced.
I used to threaten my husband's brother all the time. It's like, if he dies and you're stuck with me, and he's like, oh no. I think he's glad he didn't live in that day and time. But all of these traditions and all of these laws, and it, you get concerned. Like a writer couldn't have written a more suspenseful story if he had just made it up, because these women have already been through so much. I mean, Naomi left her home country with her husband, and then the joy of the sons growing up and finding wives and marrying, and then the men start dying. I mean, and then she goes back to her homeland and wants her name changed because she feels so bitter about everything.
Mhm.
And now, just when it looks like things are going to go their way, that this kind, evidently wealthy family person is interested in Ruth and it's all going to be taken care of, tradition may get in the way and may
Mhm.
prevent all of this from happening. And so, first I got to say I'm glad I don't live in their time.
Agree. I agree.
But some of us know the story and how it ends. So if don't tell.
Yeah, but can I give
Uh,
a cut? No, spoilers? No.
no, you can't give any spoilers.
Well, the one spoiler I would give is that the whole story ends in something that affects all of us and generations to come. So it's not just a sweet, simple story. It's going to have an effect on you and me.
And as we read scripture, that is such a common thread throughout scripture. The Old Testament is our history book, and we can follow God's plan through generations and hundreds of years.
Hmm.
And so, where we look at our life and the things going on in our world as just this moment in time, God sees the big picture. I often think about it like a maze, where when we're walking around in a maze, we can only see what is before
Right.
us and behind us.
Hmm.
But God has that drone view, that helicopter view, that aerial view, and He can not only see where I am at this moment, but He can see how I'm going to get out of this issue and the obstacles that I'm going to face along the way. And it's just kind of neat to be able to look back and read these stories and get to see the whole thing. So, but we're not going to finish it today, because you're going to have to come back again and see how this story ends. So the question is, will how do they do it in the soap operas? Will Ruth and Boaz get together and get married and live happily ever after? Or will Ruth be forced to marry someone that she doesn't love? And what's going to happen to Naomi? And does she want her name changed back? And all of that stuff. Some of those answers are in the Bible, some are not. So you got to come back and see which ones gets answered. Oh, I know I'm a nut. It's okay.
It works.
All right, before we go on, I always want to look back and see what we can learn because, yes, the Old Testament is our history book, but there's always something we can learn from Scripture. So, the first thing that I noticed is there are many kinds of love, and love can be a very powerful force. It was love that kept Naomi and Ruth together. It was love that kept these women faithful to God, even during their grief and their desperation, because they loved Him that much. And it will be another kind of love that will give Ruth a husband and Naomi a security, but we're not telling you which husband yet. And Christ said, "If you love me, you will keep my commandments." So there again, there's love. That if we love Jesus, we're going to do what he says. And we read that in John 14:15. Our love for God and his love for us is the power that we all need to keep going. You know, if we, it's amazing what we'll do for love. If there's someone that you truly love, you'll give up body parts, you'll die for them, whatever they need. You'll get that second job or stay up all night or whatever you need to do. Life can be very hard, and life was very hard for these two ladies, but they're going to continue to love God and each other and obey God. And that kind of faithful love is just such a beautiful thing to see.
Well,
So, what do you
love, love and faith are a powerful mix. One fuels the other.
think?
Obeying God is a way we show our love to Him, but it's also how we show our faith in Him. We obey Him even when we don't know the why of His instructions because we trust Him. Naomi and Ruth seem to understand this about God.
And, you know, Pam, that is such a powerful point. Even when we don't understand, even when we can't see what's going to happen, even when it looks like it's the darkest night in the middle of the storm, if we continue to love God and obey Him, He will bring about the calmness, He will bring about the sunrise, and everything is going to be okay. All right, the next thing I noticed is that integrity gets noticed. Boaz called Ruth a virtuous woman. And she didn't just claim to follow God. You know, she promised that Naomi, whatever her God was, that would, when, you know, your God will be my God. Um, and that was true. She didn't just say it, she lived it. And the same is true for us, especially today with the kind of thing that you and I are doing with all of this online media. You know, we're out there and people see us talking about the Lord, but if we're living a different life outside of these videos or outside of the other things that we're doing for God, that means nothing. And so we must have integrity in everything we do and say and let our light shine to demonstrate the love of Christ, not just talk about it. Do you have anything you wanted to say on that
No, I
one?
like what you said. That's exactly right. I don't have an
Okay.
extra thought.
All right.
Hold
And
that
then
one
the
out for
third,
Yola.
okay. Then the third thing is God will place the right people in our lives at just the right time. You know, I have found that so true to be in my own life. You're a perfect example of that. Many of our listeners don't know that you and I became friends and began our work together for the Lord before we ever met face to face.
Yeah.
And we've only met face to face one time. And so, through the magic of the internet, our
Friendship
hearts have
start.
been needed. Yes, the friendship started and it continues to grow, mainly because both of us love the Lord so much and want to do for Him. And that's the way that God works. And that's the way He works for us today. And sometimes those friendships and those people seem to come out of nowhere just when you need them. But that's how God works.
Yeah.
And so with these two ladies, they didn't know each other before. Naomi didn't know Ruth before she went to out of Bethlehem, but now they know each other, and it's no accident that things happen the way they do. God's got a plan, but we need to remember that doesn't mean that everything's going to be hunky dory and go easy just because it's part of God's plan, because bad things really do happen to good people. But God will send the right people at the right time to help us with the good times and help us with the bad. And He does that because He's our Father and He loves us.
It's true. This is where faith comes in. These women had no way of seeing how God was going to use their decisions for their benefit and ultimately to serve his plan for many others. They decided to come to Bethlehem together, and they decided Ruth should glean in fields to provide for their needs. And she found herself in the field of a relative who wanted to help. God can and will use such things to do great things.
When I hear stories like that, I've heard people say there's no such thing as a coincidence. And I say it's a Godcidence,
Oh,
because
interesting.
God is in the middle of it. He had a plan. And so I believe that God has the best recipe for lemonade there ever was. So even when I mess up, he can take it and make something good out of it.
He
But
does.
it just goes so much easier and so much faster if I just go with his will.
It's true. It really is.
It is. And so, you look and say, wow, that's interesting. She just happened to end up in the field of a relative. Well, guess what? God is in control. And he is in control then, and he is in control now. And if you want to know if Boaz and Ruth get to have their happily ever after story, you'll have to come back next time and see. What do you think, Pam? Do you have any other closing comments?
Oh, I'll give away something if I say anything else. I got to behave.
Now that's out of character for you. Oh no, I guess that'd be out
Yeah,
of character for me.
no, behaving is not my best thing either. No, I usually just skither around it better than you do.
Yeah, another reason I love you. Okay, all right. Well, tune back in next time because this story is not over, and it's a fantastic love story. You're going to want to hear the end of, and if you know the end, you're going to want to hear it over and over again.
Yeah.
This is Pam Baggett and Brenda Port signing off, and we hope you'll come back and join us next time.